Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. They were born in mud and blood, trained to deal death with mechanical precision, yet somehow became the embodiment of romance, honor, and all that was noble in the human heart. The medieval knight stands at one of history's strangest crossroads, where brutal warfare married courtly love, where men who spent their days splitting skulls spent their evenings composing poetry to unattainable ladies. This is not the contradiction you might think it is. So, this is the very essence of what knighthood was, an attempt to chain the beast of war with golden fetters of civilization. Tonight, we will ride through 1,000 years of European history, from the chaos that followed Rome's collapse to the smoke of early gunpowder that would finally silence the thunder of hoofbeats. We'll stand in the mud as young pages, feel the weight of mail on our shoulders, charge into the dust and terror of medieval battlefields. We'll explore how a military necessity became a social class, how that class became a culture, and how that culture became a dream that still haunts our collective imagination. We'll meet the real men behind the myths, understand the economics that made knighthood possible, and witness both its golden zenith and its inevitable twilight. May I ask for your help? Liking and subscribing takes just a moment, but makes a huge difference for the channel. I'm grateful for your consideration. I'm also always amazed by our international reach, so I'd appreciate hearing where you're joining from and your local time. Feel the veil between past and present growing thin as we cross into 5th century Europe, where Roman eagles no longer fly, where stone cities crumble, while wooden halls rise from forest clearings, where the clatter of bronze gives way to the ring of iron, and where, in the marriage of Germanic warrior tradition with Roman military discipline, something entirely new begins to stir. When Rome's eagles fell silent, the year is 476 CE, though no one living then would have marked it as particularly significant. In Ravenna, a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus surrenders the imperial purple to a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. The last Western Roman emperor simply stops being emperor. No great battle, no siege, no dramatic last stand. The empire that had defined civilization for a millennium ends not with a bang, but with a shrug. But power, like nature, abhors a vacuum. Across the former Roman territories, Germanic tribes are settling into lands their fathers had only dreamed of raiding. The Franks control Gaul, the Visigoths hold Spain, the Angles and Saxons are carving kingdoms from Britain, the Ostrogoths will soon claim Italy itself. Each group brings its own interpretation of warfare, its own understanding of loyalty, its own definition of what makes a warrior. Picture the landscape of this new Europe. Roman roads still cut straight lines through forests and fields, but fewer travellers dare use them. Aqueducts stand like the ribs of ancient giants, their channels dry, their purpose forgotten by people who now draw water from wells and streams. In the cities, great basilicas serve as stone quarries for crude fortifications. Libraries rot, their scrolls fuel for cooking fires, their wisdom incomprehensible to illiterate warrior kings who measure wealth in gold, arm rings and cattle rather than denarii and documents. Yet this is not the dark age of popular imagination. This is transformation, not simply decline. The Germanic peoples bring their own complex traditions, their own forms of law, their own bonds of loyalty that will prove more durable than Roman bureaucracy in this new world. They bring the comitatus, the warband bound to a chief by personal oath. They bring the concept of wergild, where every person has a blood price that maintains rough justice without state apparatus. Most importantly for our story, they bring a warrior culture that values personal combat prowess above all else. In these warbands, we see the embryo of knighthood. Warriors swear personal loyalty to a chief. The chief provides weapons, armor, food, shelter, and gold. The warriors provide their swords, their strength, their lives if necessary. It's intimate, personal, immediate, Unlike the professional Roman legions, these are not soldiers in our modern sense. They are companions, brothers in arms, bound by sacred oaths, witnessed by gods both old and new. The Christian Church, perhaps the only institution to survive Rome's fall somewhat intact, watches these developments with careful attention. These warrior bands are the new reality. Rather than oppose them, the Church begins the slow work of Christianization, of transformation, of turning pagan warriors into Christian soldiers. Bishops bless swords. Priests accompany war bands. The crucified god gradually replaces Wodan and Thor in the warrior's oath-taking, though the old gods linger in the shadows, in lucky charms, in whispered battlefield prayers. This fusion creates something unprecedented. Roman discipline, Germanic loyalty, Christian mission. From this unlikely marriage, stretched across centuries of violence and gradual consolidation, the medieval knight will eventually emerge. The stirrup revolution, sometime in the 7th century, probably introduced through contact with the Avars or other steppe peoples, a simple device appears in Western Europe that will transform warfare more profoundly than any weapon until gunpowder. The stirrup seems almost absurdly basic, 2 loops of metal or leather hanging from a saddle. Yet this modest innovation will make possible the Age of Knights, reshape European society, and echo through a millennium of military history. Before stirrups, mounted combat was a precarious proposition. A rider could throw javelins, shoot arrows, slash with a sword, but any serious impact risked unhorsing him. Watch a Roman cavalry auxiliary trying to fight from horseback. He grips with his thighs, maintains balance through extraordinary skill, but he cannot truly unite his mass with that of his mount. He is a man sitting on a horse, not yet the centaur-like fusion that will terrorize medieval battlefields. The stirrup changes everything. Now a warrior can brace himself, can stand in the saddle, can transfer the full momentum of 1,000 pounds of charging horse through his lance point. The mathematics are simple and devastating. Force equals mass times acceleration. A mounted warrior with stirrups can deliver roughly 10 times the impact of a foot soldier. He becomes not just mobile, but genuinely superhuman in his striking power. But this technological advantage comes with tremendous cost. A warhorse suitable for this kind of combat needs specific breeding, years of training, daily care. The horse alone costs as much as dozens of cattle, represents years of agricultural surplus. The armour, initially male hauberks of thousands of hand-forged rings, requires skilled smiths and precious iron. The weapons, particularly the lance and sword, demand quality steel that only specialised craftsmen can produce. The training begins in childhood and never really ends. This economic reality creates social revolution. Only the wealthy can afford the equipment. Only those with leisure can afford the training. Only those with land can maintain the whole apparatus. The stirrup doesn't just change how wars are fought, it changes who fights them and why. Military superiority becomes inextricably linked with social status. The warrior becomes an aristocrat by necessity. Consider what this means for European society. In the ancient world, citizen soldiers or professional armies defended the state. Now, military power concentrates in the hands of a few hundred or few thousand heavily armed horsemen per kingdom. These men don't serve abstract nations or distant emperors. They hold land directly, maintain local order, dispense personal justice. They are the state, or at least its most vital component. The battlefield impact is immediate and decisive. At Tours in 732, Frankish cavalry helps halt the Islamic advance into Europe. These early mounted warriors aren't yet true knights, but they point the way forward. Heavy cavalry becomes the dominant military arm, the decisive force in virtually every major battle for the next 7 centuries. Infantry still matters, but increasingly as support, as anvil to the cavalry's hammer. Yet the stirrup's most profound impact may be psychological. The mounted warrior literally looks down on those who fight on foot. He moves faster, strikes harder, survives longer. He begins to see himself as qualitatively different from common soldiers, not just better equipped, but inherently superior. This mentality, born from technological advantage, will eventually flower into the entire chivalric ideology, the notion that knights are not just warriors, but a breed apart, chosen by God and blood to rule and protect. The stirrup makes the knight possible. Everything else, the castles, the courtly culture, the crusades, the legends, flows from this simple innovation that lets a man stand firm while his horse runs at full gallop toward enemy lines. Blood in the monastery garden. Dawn comes late to Lindisfarne in June of 793. The North Sea fog clings to the Holy Island like a burial shroud, muffling the morning prayers of monks who have risen, as always, to sing their devotions. They cannot see the dragon-prowed ships that have beached just beyond the monastery walls. They cannot see the men with axes and round shields moving through the mist like wolves. The first they know of danger is when the chapel door splinters inward. What happens next will echo across Europe for 3 centuries. Vikings, those sea wolves from Scandinavia, have discovered that monasteries make perfect targets. Wealthy, undefended, isolated. Gold chalices, silver reliquaries, illuminated manuscripts worth fortunes, all guarded by men who have sworn off violence. The monks of Lindisfarne are slaughtered or enslaved. Their sanctuary is plundered. Their holy island becomes a charnel ground. Listen to the terror this spreading news creates. Every monastery, every unwalled town, every isolated farmstead now lives in fear of the longships. The Vikings don't conquer in the traditional sense. They raid, they burn, they vanish, only to appear somewhere else entirely, 300 miles down the coast, up a river no one thought navigable, behind lines everyone thought secure. They move faster than news of their coming. They strike before defense can be organized. They transform the sea from highway to threat, rivers from lifelines to invasion routes. This is the desperate context in which the mounted warrior becomes not just useful but essential. Only heavy cavalry can respond quickly enough to Viking raids. Only armoured horsemen can ride from stronghold to threatened monastery in time to matter. Only they have the striking power to face Viking warriors who have spent their lives perfecting the art of close combat. The need for protection, immediate and local, drives communities to accept whatever terms the horsemen demand. Land for service, wealth for protection, submission for survival. The church, bloodied and terrified, sanctifies this arrangement. Bishops declare that those who defend Christians from pagans do God's work. Monasteries grant vast estates to warriors who promise protection. The sword becomes blessed, violence becomes virtue, as long as it serves the right cause. From absolute pacifism, segments of the church swing toward militant Christianity. They have little choice. The alternative is extinction. The making of a warrior class. You are 8 years old in the year 812, third son of a Frankish count whose lands stretch along the Rhine. Your world smells of horse sweat and wood smoke, tastes of rough bread and watered wine, sounds like hammered iron and morning mass. Today, your father has summoned you to the Great Hall, and you know what this means. Your childhood, such as it was, ends now. The decision was made before you were born, really. First sons inherit. Second sons serve the church. Third sons must make their own way, and for boys of your blood, that way leads through war. Your mother weeps as she fastens your travelling cloak, but your father's eyes shine with pride. You are to be fostered with his liege lord, Duke Arnulf, to begin your training as a warrior. If you survive, if you prove worthy, you might one day earn your own land, your own hall, your own place in the world. The journey to Duke Arnulf's fortress takes 3 days. You ride pillion behind your father's marshal, watching the landscape change from familiar fields to foreign forests. Your whole body aches from the constant motion, but you dare not complain. Warriors don't complain. This is your first lesson, delivered without words through grinding hours in the saddle. Duke Arnulf's hall rises from a hill like a wooden crown, surrounded by a palisade of sharpened logs. Inside, everything is motion and purpose. Smiths hammer at glowing metal, grooms curry destriers that cost more than villages. Men-at-arms practice swordwork in the courtyard, their blades singing against each other in rhythms you will soon know by heart. This is your world now, a world of controlled violence and constant preparation for war. You are assigned to Sir Gerhard, Master of Pages, a scarred veteran who lost his left eye fighting Saxons. He looks you over with his remaining eye, notes your soft hands, your clean clothes, your frightened expression. Tomorrow, he tells you, these things will begin to change. Tonight, you sleep in the hall with 24 other boys, some noble-born like you, others the promising sons of men-at-arms. You are all equal here, equally worthless until proven otherwise. Your training begins before dawn. Physical conditioning, running in mail shirts, climbing siege ladders, wrestling until your muscles scream. Weapons training, first with wooden swords heavier than real ones, learning the 8 basic cuts, the 5 essential guards. Horsemanship, starting with ponies, learning to mount and dismount in armor, to control your mount with your knees, while both hands wield weapons. But also reading, writing, at least enough to understand military dispatches. Theology, to know what you fight for. Courtesy, to navigate the increasingly complex social world of nobility. You watch the older boys, the squires who have survived this training, attend their knights. They seem like giants to you, these 14 and 15-year-olds who can vault into a saddle in full mail, who can hit a quintain at full gallop. You watch the knights themselves, with something approaching worship. They move through the world with absolute confidence. These men who have earned their spurs, who bear their own arms, who answer to none but God and their sworn lord. This is the reality of creating a warrior class. It begins in childhood and never really stops. By the time you reach manhood, if you reach manhood, you will have spent over a decade learning nothing but war and its associated arts. You will be able to kill in a dozen different ways, but also to dance, to compose simple verses, to conduct yourself with courtesy in hall and battlefield alike. You are being forged like a blade, heated and hammered and folded until you become something harder and sharper than ordinary men. Charlemagne's Iron Men, the palace at Aachen in the year 800 buzzes with unprecedented energy. Charles, King of the Franks, whom history will call Charlemagne, has summoned his greatest warriors for the campaign season. They come from across his vast realm, Bavarians, Lombards, Burgundians, Aquitanians, all now united under Frankish rule. But look closer at these warriors, and you see something new emerging, something that transcends tribal identity. These are Charles's Palatini, his palace companions, the elite cavalry that form the core of Frankish military might. Each man owns estates sufficient to equip himself with the full panoply of war. Mail hauberk reaching to the knees, conical helm with nasal guard, round shield reinforced with iron boss, Sparta-style sword, winged lance, and most importantly, trained destrier capable of carrying all this weight at charging speed. They are professional warriors in an age when most men fight as seasonal levies between planting and harvest. Watch them train in the fields outside Aachen. They practice the cuneus, the wedge formation that will shatter enemy shield walls. They wheel and turn in perfect unison, hundreds of horsemen moving as single organism. This is not the wild charge of Germanic tradition, but disciplined military science, borrowed from Byzantine manuals, adapted to Frankish conditions. Each man knows his place, his role, his duty. They drill until movement becomes instinct, until they can maintain formation even in the chaos of battle. Charlemagne himself often joins these exercises. At 6 feet 4 inches, in an age when most men stand 5.5 feet tall, he towers over his companions physically as well as politically. He can still, at 58 years old, split a man from shoulder to waist with single sword stroke. His presence reminds these warriors that martial prowess matters, that their king is first among them, not just by blood but by strength. The Carolingian military reforms go deeper than training. Charles has standardized equipment, established royal arsenals, created system of military obligations tied directly to land ownership. If you hold certain amount of land from the king, you must appear when summoned, equipped for war, with specified number of followers. Failure means forfeiture of lands, social death in warrior culture. This systematization transforms occasional warbands into something approaching standing army. But perhaps Charles's greatest innovation is ideological. His warriors don't fight merely for plunder or personal glory. They are milits Christi, soldiers of Christ, spreading Christian civilization at sword point. When they charge Saxon shield walls or Avar fortifications, they carry not just Frankish power but divine mission. The Pope himself has crowned Charles emperor, reviving the Roman title 3 centuries after its extinction. These mounted warriors see themselves as heirs to Roman legacy, Germanic tradition, and Christian destiny all at once. The biography of Charlemagne, written by his courtier, Einhard, describes a scene that captures this emerging knightly identity. Ambassadors from the Caliph Harun al-Rashid arrive at Aachen bearing gifts: an elephant, mechanical clock, precious silks. The Frankish nobles, rather than being overawed by Eastern sophistication, stage military exercises that leave the ambassadors speechless. Hundreds of ironclad horsemen charge in perfect formation, their lance points catching the sun like constellation of stars. The message is clear. The West has its own power, its own civilization, built on foundation of mounted military supremacy. This is the prototype for everything that follows. Charlemagne's Palatini aren't yet knights in the full, high medieval sense, but they are no longer simple tribal warriors either. They are landed aristocracy whose position depends on military service, whose identity centers on mounted combat, whose values blend Christian mission with warrior pride. When Charlemagne's empire fragments after his death, as it inevitably must, these men and their descendants will become the local powers that hold Europe together. They will build castles, establish dynasties, create the entire feudal order that will define the medieval world. The price of a warhorse. In the year 841, in the Valley of the Meuse, a freeman named Wulfric makes a decision that will transform his family forever. The local count has issued a call to arms. Vikings have been spotted sailing up the river, and every man who holds land directly must appear at the muster, properly equipped for war or face forfeiture. Wulfric owns 12 hectares of good farmland, worked by his 3 sons and 2 hired men. It's enough to feed his family, pay his tithes, even accumulate modest surplus in good years. But it's not enough to equip a mounted warrior. The mathematics are brutal. A warhorse costs 45 solidi, more than the value of 15 cattle or 45 acres of average land. A male hauberk costs another 40 solidi. Sword, shield, helm, and lance together cost 20 more. The total expense equals the entire output of his farm for 7 years. Yet if he doesn't appear at the muster properly equipped, he loses everything immediately. Wulfric gathers his family in their modest hall. His wife weeps as he explains what must be done. They will sell 8 of their 12 hectares to Gerhard, the Count's ministerial, who has been eager to expand his holdings. The price is barely fair, but Wulfric has no negotiating power. Time is against him. With the gold from the land sale, He purchases an old but serviceable destrier from the Count's stable, a mail shirt that has seen better days, but still turns a blade, basic weapons that will suffice, if not impress. His eldest son, Aldrich, barely 16, will now work the remaining 4 hectares alone, while Wulfric campaigns. His younger sons, twins of 12 years, must hire themselves out as labourers to neighbouring estates. His daughter's dowry, carefully accumulated over years, goes to purchase a proper helm and maintain the horse through the campaign season. The family that was comfortable, even prosperous by peasant standards, teeters now on the edge of subsistence. Watch Wulfric at the muster, standing among men born to this life. His mail doesn't quite fit properly. His seat in the saddle lacks the unconscious grace of those raised to horsemanship. But he's here, legally equipped, holding his place in the military hierarchy that defines social order. The Count notes his presence, grants him the privilege of riding with the household guard rather than the general levy. It's a small distinction, but it matters. In this world, such distinctions are everything. The campaign lasts 3 months. Wulfric survives his first cavalry charge, though his inexperience nearly kills him twice. He learns to sleep in his armour, to care for his horse before himself, to follow the complex etiquette that governs warrior society. When the Vikings are finally driven off, when the Count distributes modest plunder among his men, Wulfric receives a share equal to any other mounted warrior. Not enough to recoup his investment, not nearly, but he has something more valuable: status, feudal bonds of blood and land. The great hall at Rheims fills with smoke from the central fire as Count Theoderic prepares for the most solemn ceremony of the medieval world. Before him kneels young Baldwin, son of a castellan who died defending the Count's borders against Norman raiders. Baldwin is 17, trained in arms since childhood, but owns nothing save his father's sword and a horse gifted by his mother's family. Today, that changes. Today, he enters the bonds of feudalism, that complex web of personal relationships that holds medieval society together. Baldwin places his hands between those of Count Theodoric, skin touching skin, an intimacy that transcends mere political arrangement. The words he speaks are older than Christianity in these lands, though they've been Christianized now. I, Baldwin, swear by Almighty God and all his saints that I will be faithful to you, Lord Theoderic, Count of Rheims, that I will maintain true faith and homage to you, for the fief you grant me, that I will defend you against all enemies, save only my duty to our Lord the King. Count Theodoric raises Baldwin to his feet, kisses him on both cheeks, a gesture that acknowledges him as something more than servant, but not quite equal. Then comes the investiture. The Count places in Baldwin's hands a clod of earth wrapped in silk, symbol of the estate at Montford, 300 hectares with a wooden hall, a mill, attached village of 40 families, enough to maintain a mounted warrior, to fulfill military obligations, to establish a minor dynasty if managed well. But understand what this moment truly means. This is not simple property transfer, as moderns might recognise it. Baldwin doesn't own Montford in any absolute sense. He holds it in fief, conditional on service. 40 days of military service each year, garrison duty when required, council when summoned. If he fails these obligations, the land reverts. If he dies without legitimate heir, the land reverts. If he commits treason, however defined, the land is forfeit, and his life with it. The relationship runs both directions, creating what historians will later call the feudal contract. Count Theoderic must protect Baldwin from external threats, must provide justice if Baldwin is wronged, must maintain Baldwin's rights against all challengers. If the Count fails these obligations, technically, theoretically, Baldwin can renounce his homage, though doing so risks everything. The system works not through written law, but through personal honour, through the terrible weight of sworn oaths in a culture that believes God actively punishes oath breakers. This personal nature of feudalism cannot be overemphasized. Baldwin doesn't serve an abstract state or nation. He serves Count Theodoric specifically, this particular man whose hands enclosed his own. When the Count dies, Baldwin must renew his oath to the heir, and that heir might accept or refuse the renewal. Every relationship is personal, immediate, negotiated between individuals who know each other's faces, families, capabilities. Yet from these thousands of individual relationships emerges a system that governs most of Europe. Each knight holds land from a lord, who holds from a greater lord, who holds from a king, who theoretically holds from God. It creates a pyramid of obligation and protection, a way of organizing military defense and civil administration without bureaucracy or standing armies. The system is inefficient, often unjust, prone to constant conflict, as oath conflicts with oath, but it works well enough to endure for 500 years. Baldwin rides to Montfort 3 days later, accompanied by Count Theodoric's seneschal, who will witness his taking possession. The peasants gather in the courtyard, wary of this young new lord who holds power of life and death over them. Baldwin climbs to the hall's threshold, draws his father's sword, drives it into the doorpost. "I claim this land by right of arms and grant of my lord Count," he declares. "I will defend it against all enemies. I will maintain justice according to custom. I will be your lord as you will be my people." The first castles rise. Morning mist clings to the earthworks as 100 men labour in the valley of the Loire. They are building what local peasants call the Devil's Mountain, though the Norman lord who commands them prefers the term motte and bailey. Watch as they pile earth higher and higher, creating an artificial hill that will rise 40 feet above the surrounding plain. Every basket of soil is tamped down, compressed until the mound becomes solid as bedrock. This is the birth of the medieval castle, and with it, the transformation of warfare and society. The design is elegantly simple. The motte, this man-made mountain, will support a wooden keep at its summit. Around its base, the bailey extends, a courtyard protected by a palisade of sharpened logs and a deep ditch. A single bridge, easily destroyed in crisis, connects the bailey to the motte. If enemies breach the outer defences, defenders retreat up the motte to the keep, the last stand position that can withstand siege for weeks. Listen to the sounds of construction. Axes bite into ancient oaks, felling trees that have stood since Charlemagne's time. Saws rasp through timber, shaping the massive posts that will support the tower. Hammers drive iron nails, precious and expensive, binding the structure together. The smell of fresh cut wood mingles with the sweat of workers, the smoke from forge fires, the earthiness of disturbed soil. This castle, like hundreds others rising across Europe, represents a revolution in military thinking. The Vikings could overwhelm any unfortified settlement, but a motte and bailey changes the equation. Even a small garrison can hold such a position against a much larger force. Raiders seeking quick plunder will bypass such strongholds for easier targets. The castle becomes an island of security in an ocean of threat. But castles are more than military architecture. They are statements of power, declarations of permanence, anchors of authority. The knight who holds a castle controls the surrounding countryside absolutely. Peasants seeking protection must accept his terms. Merchants wanting safe passage must pay his tolls. Lesser knights needing refuge must offer service. The castle creates its own political gravity, bending the social landscape around it. The wooden palisade gleams with fresh resin, golden in the morning sunday. Soon it will weather to grey, will sprout with moss and lichen, will seem as natural as the hills themselves. Within a generation, some of these wooden structures will be rebuilt in stone, becoming the massive fortresses that still dot the European landscape. But even in their wooden youth, they transform everything they touch. Twilight of the Dark Ages. The chapel bells of Cluny Abbey ring out across Burgundy on Easter morning in the year 999. Many who hear them believe they are counting down to the world's end, that the millennium will bring Christ's return and the final judgment. Yet the world that emerges from this mythical midnight is not ending but transforming. The darkest phase of the Dark Ages is passing. Something we might recognize as medieval civilization is being born. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. Trade routes, dormant for centuries, are reopening. Italian merchants venture beyond the Alps again, carrying spices and silks from the east. Norse raiders have become Norman settlers, their savage energy channeling into castle building and administrative innovation. The Magyars, once the terror of Central Europe, have accepted Christianity and settled into the Kingdom of Hungary. Even the fragmenting Carolingian Empire has stabilized into the recognizable kingdoms of France and the Holy Roman Empire. Agricultural innovation drives this transformation. The heavy-wheeled plough, which can turn the rich but stubborn soils of Northern Europe, spreads across the continent. The three-field system replaces the two-field, increasing yields by 50%. Watermills proliferate along every stream, grinding grain, fulling cloth, powering the first stammering steps toward mechanization. Population, static or declining for 5 centuries, begins its upward climb. With agricultural surplus comes specialization. Not everyone must farm to eat. Blacksmiths perfect their craft, moving from simple tools to complex armor. Stonemasons rediscover techniques lost since Rome, beginning the first tentative experiments that will culminate in Gothic cathedrals. Scholars gather in monasteries and nascent cathedral schools, preserving and copying ancient texts, beginning the intellectual revival that will become the 12th century Renaissance. The knights benefit from all of this. Better agriculture means more surplus to support professional warriors. Better metallurgy means superior armor and weapons. Growing population means more younger sons seeking fortune through military service. The rough warbands of the 9th century are evolving into something more refined, more specialized, more socially distinct. The church, growing in confidence and authority, begins to shape this warrior class more actively. The Peace of God movement attempts to limit violence, declaring certain people and places immune from warfare: clergy, peasants, merchants, churches, and markets. The Truce of God goes further, banning warfare on Sundays, holy days, eventually from Wednesday evening to Monday morning. Knights who violate these restrictions face excommunication, spiritual death in a deeply religious age. This ecclesiastical pressure forces knights to think more carefully about their violence. They cannot simply raid at will anymore. They must consider whether their cause is just, whether their targets are legitimate, whether their actions serve God as well as their earthly lords. From this forced reflection will eventually emerge the chivalric code, the attempt to reconcile the warrior's nature with Christian virtue. Stand on any hill in Western Europe as the 10th century becomes the 11th, and you see a landscape in transformation. Where once dark forests press close to isolated settlements, now cleared fields stretch toward the horizon. Where Viking longships once prowled every river, now merchant vessels carry wool and wine. Where wooden halls once stood alone, now stone towers rise beside them, promising permanence. The stage is set for the High Middle Ages. The knights who will dominate this coming era are no longer barbarian warriors, barely removed from tribal tradition. They are landed aristocracy, educated in letters as well as arms, conscious of their distinct identity and developing ideology. They have wealth, they have castles, they have the church's cautious blessing, and they have enemies worthy of their strength. The transformation is nearly complete. The mud-splattered horsemen who emerged from Rome's collapse have become something new, a hereditary military caste that sees itself as divinely ordained to rule and protect. They await only a cause grand enough to unite them, a challenge that will transform them from mere heavy cavalry into the legendary knights of Christendom. In the East, such a challenge is already taking shape. Jerusalem, the holy city where Christ walked and died and rose again, has been in Muslim hands for 4 centuries. Soon, very soon, a pope will stand before assembled knights and call them to reclaim it. The age of the Crusades approaches, and with it, the full flowering of knighthood in all its glory and horror. The foundation is complete. The knight has been born from the union of German warrior tradition, Roman organizational legacy, and Christian mission. The stage is set for the drama of the High Middle Ages, where these ironclad horsemen will ride from the Scottish Highlands to the sands of Palestine, leaving their mark on every land they touch, creating legends that will outlive their castles, their kingdoms, even their god. The anvil of childhood. The training field at Warwick Castle echoes with the clash of wooden swords as 24 boys between 7 and 14 years old struggle through their morning drills. It is the year 1123, and the system for creating knights has evolved from the rough fosterage of earlier centuries into something approaching formal education. These are pages, the lowest rung on the ladder to knighthood, and their bodies are the raw metal from which warriors will be forged. Watch young Richard de Montfort, second son of a baron, as he faces his instructor, Sir Drogo, a veteran of the First Crusade, who left 3 fingers in the sands of Antioch. Richard is 9 years old, has been training for 2 years, yet still the weighted wooden sword trembles in his small hands. Sir Drogo does not coddle him. The massive knight brings his own practice sword down in an overhead cut that would split Richard's skull were it steel. The boy manages to raise his shield, barely, and the impact drives him to his knees. Again, Drogo commands. Your enemy will not wait for you to find your courage. The physical training is relentless and begins before dawn. The pages run the castle walls in weighted tunics, building the stamina that will one day let them fight for hours in full armour. They climb rope ladders carrying sacks of sand, developing the upper body strength needed to scale siege walls. They wrestle, learning to fight when unhorsed, mastering throws and locks that could save their lives in the press of battle. Every muscle must be conditioned, every reflex trained, until their bodies respond without thought. But the education goes far beyond mere combat. In the castle's chapel, Brother Augustine teaches them to read Latin, at least enough to understand their prayers and perhaps a military dispatch. They learn the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. A knight must be able to calculate the supplies needed for a campaign, to understand the geometry of siege warfare, to navigate by the stars. Ignorance is no longer acceptable in the warrior class. The social education is equally crucial. These boys must learn to serve before they can command. They wait at table during feasts, learning the elaborate etiquette that governs noble society. They practice carving meat, pouring wine without spilling, presenting dishes with proper ceremony. They observe how great lords interact, how alliances are forged over venison and wine, how a misplaced word can spark a blood feud that lasts generations. Music and poetry occupy their scant leisure hours. A true knight should be able to compose simple verses to honour his lord or his lady. He should play the lute or sing well enough to entertain in the hall. These are not mere social graces, but essential skills in a world where courtly reputation matters as much as martial prowess. The knight who can turn a clever phrase or compose a moving lay gains advantages no sword alone could win. The pages sleep together in the great hall, their straw pallets arranged in neat rows like a monastic dormitory. But unlike monks, these boys are encouraged to compete constantly. Who can run fastest in armour? Who can recite the longest passage from the Chanson de Roland? Who can remain standing longest, while older pages rain blows upon his shield? Every activity becomes a contest, fostering the competitive spirit that will drive them through the brutal realities of medieval warfare. Punishments are harsh and physical. A page who fails in his duties might be beaten with a switch, forced to fast, or made to stand all night in the courtyard, holding his sword at arm's length. One boy, caught stealing food from the kitchens, is stripped and whipped before his peers, a lesson in the consequences of dishonor that none will forget. The weak break under this regime, sent home in disgrace or relegated to lesser roles. Only the strong advance. As the years pass, the training intensifies. By age 12, the pages begin working with real weapons under careful supervision. They learn the art of swordsmanship, the 8 basic cuts, the 5 fundamental guards, the footwork that can mean the difference between victory and death. They study different weapon systems, the devastating power of the mace against armor, the reach advantage of the poleaxe, the versatility of the sword and shield combination. Horsemanship becomes increasingly central. The pages start with ponies, learning to guide their mounts with their knees while keeping both hands free for combat. They practice mounting and dismounting in armor, a feat requiring both strength and agility. They learn to charge with lances, aiming at quintains that spin when struck, teaching them to avoid the return blow. A knight who cannot fight from horseback is no knight at all. The culmination of page training comes around age 14, when the most promising boys are selected to become squires. This is not automatic promotion. Many pages never advance, lacking either the skill, the temperament, or the social connections necessary for advancement. Those chosen face a ceremony almost as solemn as knighthood itself. They kneel before their future knightmaster, swear oaths of loyal service, and receive the silver spurs that mark their new status. From the 24 boys who began training together 7 years ago, perhaps 6 will become squires. Of those 6, maybe 2 will eventually earn knighthood. The rest will find other paths: men-at-arms, castle administrators, or return to manage family estates. But all have been shaped by this crucible, marked forever by the discipline and violence of their training. They have learned that knighthood is not inherited, but earned through sweat, blood, and unwavering dedication to the warrior's craft. In the squire's shadow, you are 14 years old, newly made squire to Sir Roland de Vera, and every muscle in your body screams as you struggle to lift his mail hauberk over your head. The year is 1142, and you have just discovered that serving a knight is nothing like the romantic tales suggested. The armour alone weighs 60 pounds, and this is just the beginning of your daily ordeal. Dawn has not yet broken, but you must rise before your master. His equipment needs checking, every ring in the mail examined for rust or breaks, the sword edge tested for nicks, the straps of his helm inspected for wear. You polish his spurs until they gleam like silver stars, oil the leather of his scabbard, ensure his lance point is properly secured. Only when everything is perfect can you wake Sir Roland, and God help you if anything is amiss. You dress him like a priest preparing for mass, each piece of equipment placed in ritual order. First the arming cap, padded with wool to cushion the helm's weight, then the mail coif that protects his neck and shoulders. The hauberk comes next, and you must hold its full weight while he ducks underneath, letting it cascade down his body like water made of iron. You buckle his sword belt, adjust the hang of his scabbard, strap on his spurs. Each gesture must be precise, practiced, perfect. Your duties extend far beyond mere armour-bearer. In battle, you are his shadow, leading his destrier by the bridle until the moment of charge, handing him fresh lances when his breaks, defending him if he falls. You have already seen combat twice, though from the edges, watching Sir Roland carve through enemy lines while you waited with the spare horses, your heart hammering against your ribs, praying you would not have to enter that maelstrom of blood and steel. In peacetime, you manage his household affairs. You supervise the servants who maintain his equipment. You keep his accounts, recording the expenses of maintaining a knight's lifestyle, the cost of horse feed, armor repairs, tournament entry fees. You negotiate with merchants for supplies, with armorers for repairs, with horse traders for new mounts. These mundane skills matter as much as swordplay. A knight who cannot manage his resources will lose his status as surely as one who cannot fight. The physical training continues, harder now than when you were a page. Each morning after attending to Sir Roland, you practice combat with other squires, under the master-at-arms' brutal tutelage. Real swords now, though blunted, and real bruises that purple your skin like spilled wine. You must be ready to fight alongside your master if needed, to defend him if he falls, to bear his arms with honour if he cannot. Your education in courtly matters intensifies. Sir Roland expects you to conduct correspondence on his behalf, writing in the flowery style that nobility demands. You must know the ancestry of every important family in the region, understanding the complex web of alliances and feuds that govern political life. When Sir Roland travels to court, you announce him at feasts, speaking his titles and victories in ringing tones that honour his reputation. The relationship between knight and squire is intimate, almost familial. You sleep outside his chamber door, ready to respond to any need. You know his moods, his preferences, his secrets. You have seen him weep after killing a friend in a tournament gone wrong, have held his head while he vomited from too much wine, have bound wounds he would not show to anyone else. He is teaching you to be a knight, but also teaching you to be a man in this violent world. The vigil before dawn, the chapel at Reims Cathedral stands empty, save for you, its vast spaces swallowing the single candle flame that holds back the darkness. Tomorrow you will be made a knight, but tonight you kneel on cold stone, alone with God, and the weight of the oaths you will soon swear. This is the vigil, the night of purification, when a squire makes peace with his soul before taking up the sword in earnest. Your armour lies on the altar before you, arranged like the body of a fallen warrior. The white surcoat bears no device yet. Tomorrow you will receive your arms, the heraldic symbols that will identify you for the rest of your life. The sword that lies across the mail seems to pulse in the candlelight, its blade naked and expectant. You have trained with swords for 15 years, but this one is different. This one will be blessed, will become an extension of not just your body, but your soul. The silence is profound, broken only by your breathing and the distant sound of wind through stone. You are supposed to be praying, contemplating the sacred duties of knighthood, but your mind wanders to tomorrow's ceremony. Your father will be there, the Baron de Montmorency, pride shining in his eyes. Your mother too, though she fears what you will become, knows too well the cost of living by the sword. Your younger brother watches you with envy. In 3 years, he too will keep this vigil. The prayers you recite are ancient, some older than Christianity in these lands. You ask for strength in battle, wisdom in judgment, mercy in victory. You pray for the courage to face death without fear, to maintain honour when easier paths beckon, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The words feel heavy on your tongue, weighted with the knowledge that tomorrow you join a brotherhood that stretches back to Charlemagne's paladins and forward to the end of time. As the night deepens, your knees begin to ache against the stone. This too is part of the trial, the physical discomfort that mirrors the spiritual struggle. To be a knight is to embrace suffering, to accept pain as the price of honour. Your vigil is nothing compared to what awaits. The exhaustion of forced marches, the agony of wounds, the weight of taking human life. This night of discomfort is merely initiation into a lifetime of hardship willingly embraced. Steel becomes flesh. The relationship between a knight and his armour transcends mere equipment. It becomes a second skin, a steel soul that defines his very existence. In the armoury of Windsor Castle, Master Guillaume, the armourer, oversees the creation of a harness that will protect young Sir Thomas Beaumont, whose family has paid 3 years' revenue from their estates for this privilege. The year is 1178, and the art of armor making has evolved into something approaching perfection. Watch Master Guillaume as he measures every dimension of Thomas's body with the precision of a master tailor. The length of his arms, the breadth of his shoulders, the circumference of his chest at full breadth. Each measurement matters because armor must fit perfectly. Too loose, and it becomes a rattling cage that exhausts its wearer. Too tight, and it restricts movement, turning protection into prison. The armor must move as the knight moves, becoming an extension of his will. The male hauberk alone requires 8,000 individually forged rings, each one heated, shaped, riveted, closed. 4 rings link through every fifth, creating a fabric of steel that can turn aside most cutting blows. The process takes 3 months of constant work by skilled craftsmen. Each ring must be perfect. A single weak link could mean death. The finished hauberk weighs 35 pounds and reaches to the knight's knees, split for riding. But mail alone no longer suffices. Knights now wear additional plates at vulnerable points. Steel polins for the knees, couters for the elbows, a coat of plates protecting the torso. This transitional armour, not yet the full plate of later centuries, represents a constant evolution in response to improving weapons. As swords become better at finding gaps in mail, armour grows to close those gaps. As arrows become more powerful, armour thickens to defeat them. The helmet deserves special attention. The simple conical helm, with nasal guard, is giving way to the great helm, a cylindrical construction that completely encases the head. Vision comes through narrow slits, breathing through small holes. Inside, thick padding cushions impact but also traps heat and muffles sound. Wearing the great helm is like entering a different world, one where peripheral vision vanishes, where your own breathing echoes in your ears, where the outside world becomes distant and dreamlike. Consider the cost of this equipment in human terms. A complete suit of armour costs as much as a small village produces in a year. The sword alone, pattern-welded steel imported from the Rhine, costs what a skilled craftsman earns in 5 years. The warhorse, trained from birth for combat, costs even more than the armour. A fully equipped knight represents an investment equal to millions in modern currency, all focused on creating a single warrior of surpassing power. Yet armour is more than protection. It is identity. The polished steel reflects not just light, but the knight's status, his separation from common humanity. When a knight dons his armour, he transforms from man to symbol, from individual to archetype. The weight that would crush an untrained man becomes comfortable through years of conditioning. The restriction of movements becomes familiar as his own skin. The armour shapes the knight as much as the knight shapes the armour. The psychology of armour runs deep. Encased in steel, a knight feels invulnerable, superhuman. The protection liberates him to take risks no sane man would consider, but it also isolates him, creates a barrier between himself and the world. Inside his helm, he is alone with his breath, his heartbeat, his fear. The armour that protects his body, exposes his soul, forces him to confront who he truly is when death comes calling. Pope Urban's thunder, the Council of Clermont, in November of 1095 thrums with unprecedented energy. Pope Urban II has summoned the nobility and clergy of France for what rumours suggest will be a proclamation of world-shaking importance. The crowd that gathers exceeds all expectations. Knights, bishops, abbots, and common folk pack the cathedral and spill into the frozen fields beyond. What they hear will redirect the violent energy of European knighthood and launch 2 centuries of holy war. Urban rises to speak, and his words carry the force of divine command. A race absolutely alien to God has invaded the land of Christians, has reduced the people with sword, rapine, and flame. The holy places where Christ walked are defiled by pagan feet. Jerusalem itself, the navel of the world, cries out for liberation. To those who take up this cause, I promise remission of all sins. Those who die in battle against the heathen will enter immediately into the glory of paradise. The response is volcanic. Deus vult, the crowd roars. God wills it. Knights who moments before were plotting against their neighbours now drop to their knees, tearing strips from their cloaks to fashion crosses, marking themselves as soldiers of Christ. The violence endemic to European society suddenly has divine purpose and direction. The swords that the Church has tried so desperately to control are now blessed, sanctified, aimed at an enemy everyone can embrace. Bishop Adhemar de Monteil, appointed papal legate to lead this expedition, immediately begins organising what will become the First Crusade. But understand what Urban has truly accomplished here. He has taken the warrior culture of Europe, with all its violence and contradictions, and given it transcendent meaning. Knights are no longer merely warriors. They are pilgrims with swords, agents of divine justice, instruments of God's will on earth. The transformation is immediate and profound. Robert Curthose, Duke of Normandy, pawns his entire duchy to his brother to fund his participation. Godfrey of Bouillon sells or mortgages all his lands, declaring he may never return. Raymond of Toulouse, one of the wealthiest lords in Europe, liquidates vast holdings to equip an army. These men are not fools or fanatics. They are knights who have found in Urban's call the purpose their entire culture has been seeking. The Church had long struggled with the paradox of Christian warriors. Christ preached peace, yet society required violence for survival. Various theological gymnastics had attempted to reconcile this contradiction. Just war theory, the peace of God movement, the concept of the three orders of society. But Urban's masterstroke solves the paradox by embracing it. Violence in service of the faith is not merely acceptable but holy. The knight's sword becomes an instrument of salvation for his enemies and himself. Yet there are darker currents in this tide of enthusiasm. As crusading fever spreads, some knights turn their holy violence on easier targets. Jewish communities in the Rhineland are massacred by crusaders who see no need to travel to Jerusalem to fight the enemies of Christ. The Pope condemns these attacks, but the violence once unleashed is not easily controlled. The sword blessed for one purpose cuts wherever its wielder directs. Jerusalem through smoke and tears. Sir Hugh de Payens stands on the walls of Jerusalem on July 15th, 1099, his sword still dripping with blood that will not wash clean no matter how hard he scrubs. He is 29 years old, a minor knight from Champagne, who has survived 3 years of unimaginable hardship to reach this moment. The holy city is finally in Christian hands, but the cost of victory sits like iron in his stomach. The assault began at dawn. After a month of siege, the Crusaders' siege towers finally reached Jerusalem's walls. Hugh was among the first over, following Godfrey of Bouillon onto the ramparts. What should have been the greatest moment of his life became instead a descent into hell. The defenders fought with the desperation of the doomed. Every street became a battlefield, every house a fortress. The heat was overwhelming, made worse by armour that turned into an oven under the Palestinian Sunday. But it was after the walls fell that the true horror began. The Crusader army, driven mad by years of suffering, by religious fervour, by the intoxication of finally achieving their goal, lost all restraint. The killing became indiscriminate. Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians who looked foreign to Western eyes, all fell beneath Crusader swords. Hugh tried to maintain discipline among his men, but his voice was lost in the screaming. He remembers finding a family huddled in a house near the Temple Mount. The father stood before his wife and children, armed only with a kitchen knife, prepared to die defending them. The man's courage pierced through Hugh's battle fury. Here was honour, here was nobility, in this Muslim defender of his family. Hugh lowered his sword, began to turn away, but another crusader pushed past him and cut the family down. "Children and all, God wills it," the knight shouted, his eyes wild with religious ecstasy. The Temple Mount itself became a charnel house. Thousands had taken refuge in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, promised protection by Tancred, who had placed his banner over them, but promises meant nothing in the madness. The Crusaders broke in and slaughtered everyone. The chroniclers, writing later, would claim the blood ran knee-deep, an exaggeration perhaps, but Hugh remembers slipping on the slick stones, his boots finding no purchase on the blood-soaked floor. Now, as evening falls, Hugh stands watching the smoke rise from burning synagogues, listening to the victory hymns of his fellow crusaders. They sing of God's triumph, of Christian valor, of divine justice accomplished. But Hugh feels only emptiness. This is not the glorious victory the Pope promised. This is not the noble battle the songs describe. This is butchery wearing the mask of righteousness. In years to come, Hugh de Payens will found the Knights Templar, attempting to create a different kind of warrior monk, one who fights with discipline and restraint. But tonight, he is just a young knight, trying to reconcile the ideals he was raised with and the reality he has witnessed. The conquest of Jerusalem, the greatest triumph of knightly culture, has revealed the darkness that lurks beneath the shining armor. The sword that was supposed to bring salvation has brought only slaughter. The white mantle of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, or rather, its ruins, provides unlikely headquarters for Christianity's most paradoxical creation. Here, in 1119, Hugh de Payens and 8 fellow knights take vows that will transform them into something unprecedented. Warrior monks, the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, known to history as the Knights Templar. They kneel before Warmond, Patriarch of Jerusalem, surrendering not just their swords but their very selves to a new conception of knighthood. The rule they follow, written with the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux, attempts the impossible, to reconcile the violence of warfare with monastic devotion. Templars take the 3 monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but add a 4th, to protect Christian pilgrims with their lives. They may own nothing personally, even their swords belong to the order. They may not marry, may not even speak to women without permission. They must obey their superiors absolutely, without question or hesitation. Watch a day in the life of these warrior monks. They rise at 4 for matins, praying in the darkness while their secular counterparts still sleep off wine and revelry. 7 times each day, they pause for prayer, no matter what else demands attention. Between these devotions, they train with weapons with the same dedication secular knights reserve for tournaments. But there are no individual champions among Templars. They fight as a unit, disciplined and coordinated, in ways that make them devastatingly effective. Their appearance sets them apart from worldly knights. The white mantle with its red cross becomes legendary, but underneath, their discipline shows in subtler ways. No gold or silver decorates their equipment. Their beards grow long, as the rule forbids excessive attention to appearance. They eat in silence, listening to scripture. They sleep in common dormitories, fully clothed, a candle burning all night to prevent any impropriety. Every aspect of their lives is regulated, controlled, directed toward their dual purpose as monks and warriors. The Templar innovation in banking deserves special attention. Pilgrims travelling to the Holy Land face constant threat from bandits. The Templars develop a system where travellers can deposit funds at any Templar commandery in Europe and withdraw them in Jerusalem, carrying only a coded receipt. This simple innovation makes the Templars indispensable to medieval commerce. Within decades, they become Europe's primary banking institution, managing the wealth of kings and popes. Their military reputation grows even faster. At the Battle of Hattin, Templars charge impossible odds rather than retreat. When captured, they refuse ransom, choosing death over dishonor. Saladin, who respects courage even in enemies, says of them, "I have fought many enemies, but none more formidable than these monks who fight like lions and die like martyrs." Their discipline, training, and absolute fearlessness make them the elite special forces of the Crusader kingdoms. The temple's wealth and power inevitably create enemies. Secular knights resent their privileges and exemption from local authority. Bishops despise their independence from church hierarchy. Kings covet their treasures. By the early 14th century, the order has become too powerful for its own good. Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, orchestrates their destruction. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Templars across France are arrested simultaneously, accused of heresy, sodomy, and worshipping false idols. The charges are absurd, extracted through torture, but they serve their purpose. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, is burned at the stake in 1314, reportedly cursing both King Philip and Pope Clement to meet him before God within the year. Both die within months, fueling legends that persist to this day. The Templars' vast wealth vanishes, their secrets die with them, their revolutionary fusion of monk and knight is never successfully replicated. Yet their influence on knighthood is permanent. They proved that knights could be more than individual warriors seeking glory. They demonstrated the power of discipline, organization, and shared purpose. Every military order that follows owes something to the Templars' example. Even secular knighthood absorbs lessons from these warrior monks. The value of restraint, the power of corporate identity, the strength found in something greater than individual honor. Songs in the Great Hall. The Great Hall of Aquitaine glows with the light of 100 candles as Eleanor, Duchess and Queen presides over an evening that will reshape European culture. The year is 1168, and the tradition of courtly love is reaching its sophisticated peak. Knights who would normally compete with swords now vie with verses, seeking to win favour not through violence, but through artistic expression. Listen to the troubadour Bernard de Ventadorn. As his voice rises above the hushed assembly, he sings of impossible love, of a knight who serves his lady with the same devotion he offers God, knowing his passion can never be consummated. The contradiction is intentional, exquisite, transforming base desire into spiritual elevation. Knights who spent the morning practicing the art of killing now lean forward to catch every nuanced word about the art of yearning. This is the revolution Eleanor and her coterie of poets have wrought. They have convinced Europe's warriors that true nobility lies not in conquest, but in constraint, not in possession, but in longing, not in satisfaction, but in service to an ideal that can never be fully achieved. The same knights who took Jerusalem by storm now write poems comparing their ladies' eyes to stars they can never reach. The Round Table's shadow, the manuscript illumination, shows Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, his face serene with divine certainty. But look at the faces of the knights watching this scene. Painted in 1203 by a monk who has never held a sword but understands what moves the hearts of warriors. They show wonder, yes, but also relief. Here at last is a king worth following, a cause worth dying for, a brotherhood that transcends the petty feuds and land disputes that consume their daily lives. Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, completed in 1136, created Arthur from fragments of Welsh legend and Roman memory. But what Chrétien de Troyes and his successors have made of Arthur speaks to deeper needs in knightly culture. The Round Table, where no knight sits higher than another, offers an alternative to the rigid hierarchies of feudal society. The quest for the Holy Grail transforms martial prowess into spiritual journey. Lancelot's doomed love for Guinevere elevates adultery into tragedy of cosmic proportions. Real knights model themselves on these fictional ideals. Edward III will establish an actual round table at Windsor, complete with Arthurian pageantry. Tournament participants adopt Arthurian names and personas. Young knights swear oaths on the Grail stories, as if they were scripture. The fiction becomes more real than reality, more influential than any actual king or battle. The power of Arthurian legend lies in its perfect resolution of knighthood's contradictions. Arthur is the once and future king, who will return in Britain's hour of greatest need, making every present king a mere placeholder. The Round Table Knights are paragons of virtue who nonetheless fail, sin, and die, making every real knight's failures bearable by comparison. The quest for the Grail transforms earthly violence into heavenly purpose, even though the Grail itself remains forever just out of reach. This is what the medieval mind does with its ideals. It pushes them into an imagined past or an impossible future, close enough to inspire, but far enough to never disappoint. Every real knight knows he falls short of Lancelot's prowess, Galahad's purity, Gawain's courtesy, but in striving toward these impossible standards, they become something more than mere warriors. They become characters in their own romantic narrative, players in a cosmic drama, where every small gesture toward honor matters, blood sport, and pageantry. You are 22 years old, a newly made knight, and your hands shake as you adjust your helm one final time. The tournament field at Lagny-sur-Marne stretches before you, and 3,000 spectators have gathered to watch you and 99 other knights attempt to maim each other for glory. The year is 1179, and tournaments have evolved from simple military exercises into elaborate spectacles that define aristocratic culture. The herald's trumpet pierces the morning air. You touch spurs to your destriers' flanks and surge forward with 49 other knights of the northern party. Across the field, 50 southern knights mirror your charge. The combined thunder of 200 hooves on hard-packed earth fills the world. Your lance drops to horizontal, its point seeking target. Through your helm's narrow vision slit, you see an opponent in blue and gold racing toward you. Time stretches. You can hear your own breathing, feel each heartbeat, see dust motes dancing in the light that streams through your visor. Impact. Your lance strikes his shield dead center and explodes into splinters. His lance catches your shoulder, spinning you in the saddle but not unseating you. You throw away the broken shaft, draw your sword, wheel your horse for another pass. All around you, knights clash in a storm of steel and horseflesh. This is the grand melee, the mass combat that separates tournament from reality only by the technical agreement not to deliberately kill. The crowd roars its approval as you exchange sword blows with the blue and gold knight. Each impact rings through your armor like a bell strike. Your arms already ache, and the melee has barely begun. These tournaments can last hours until exhaustion or injury claims most participants. You must pace yourself, choose your battles, conserve strength for the long ordeal ahead. A knight you don't recognize, his device, a black eagle on silver, appears on your left. Together, you could overwhelm your opponent, and he seems to recognize the same opportunity. Without words, you coordinate your attack, driving the blue and gold knight toward the barrier. He yields rather than be trampled, raising his sword hilt first in surrender. One small victory in a battle that will see dozens of similar individual dramas. As the melee continues, you begin to understand the tournament's true purpose. This is not really about military training, though it serves that function. This is theatre, a stage where knights perform their identity for an audience that includes potential patrons, marriageable women, and rival lords. Every blow struck, every opponent defeated, every act of courage or courtesy becomes part of your reputation, the invisible currency that determines your place in this world. The Black Prince at Crécy. The morning of August 26, 1346, dawns grey and drizzling over the fields near Crécy-en-Ponthieu. Edward, Prince of Wales, later called the Black Prince, stands with his father's army as it prepares to face a French force 3 times its size. At 16 years old, commanding the vanguard, Edward is about to participate in a battle that will shatter the traditional superiority of mounted knights and herald the beginning of their long decline. The English position is carefully chosen. They occupy a slight rise, their flanks protected by forest and the village. But their true innovation lies in the forest of stakes they've driven into the soft ground and the 5,000 longbowmen who stand behind them. These are not noble warriors, but common Welshmen and Englishmen. They're 6-foot yew-bows capable of driving arrows through mail at 200 yards. Each archer has 60 arrows. Together, they represent 300,000 potential deaths. The French arrive in late afternoon, their armour glittering despite the overcast sky. They are the flower of European chivalry, 12,000 mounted knights and men-at-arms, confident in their superiority, eager for glory. Philip VI orders them to halt, to rest, to attack tomorrow with fresh horses and clear vision. But the knights at the rear, unable to see the English position, push forward, shouting that the vanguard is claiming all the honour. Discipline collapses. The attack begins piecemeal, without coordination. Watch what happens when medieval warfare's irresistible force meets its immovable object. The French knights charge up the slope, their horses struggling in mud churned by morning rain. When they reach 150 yards, the English archers loose. The sky darkens with arrows, 5 per second from each bow. A continuous rain of death. Horses scream and fall. Knights tumble in the mud, their heavy armour becoming death traps. Those who reach the English lines find their exhausted horses unable to break through the stakes. The French charge 16 times. 16 times they are repulsed. The cream of French knighthood lies dying in the mud, killed not in honourable single combat, but by arrows fired by peasants they would not acknowledge on the street. The Genoese crossbowmen, hired to counter the longbows, flee after their first volley falls short. The French knights, in their fury, ride down their own retreating allies. Prince Edward fights on foot among his men-at-arms, his black armour making him a rallying point for the English line. When the French briefly break through, he stands his ground, sword in hand, fighting with a discipline that would have been impossible from horseback. His father, watching from the windmill that serves as his command post, refuses to send reinforcements. "Let the boy win his spurs," King Edward says, understanding that his son must prove himself or forever be overshadowed. As darkness falls, the field belongs to the English. 11 princes, 80 lords with banner rights, 1,200 knights, and thousands of men-at-arms lie dead. The English have lost fewer than 300 men. The mathematics of warfare have changed forever. The mounted knight, who has dominated European battlefields for 5 centuries, has been proven vulnerable to disciplined infantry with projectile weapons. Yet the lesson of Crécy is misunderstood by those who most need to learn it. The French nobility blame the defeat on cowardice, poor timing, anything but the fundamental truth that their era is ending. They will charge English arrows again at Poitiers, at Agincourt, each time with the same result. The knights cannot accept that peasants with sticks and string have made their expensive armour, their lifetime of training, their entire identity obsolete. They continue to charge because that is what knights do, even when charging means certain death. Chivalry's golden chains. The code of chivalry, that elaborate system of ideals that supposedly governs knightly behaviour, exists more perfectly in literature than life. Yet by the 14th century, this fictional framework exercises real power over European aristocracy, creating a web of obligations and expectations that both elevate and constrain those bound by it. The contradiction between ideal and reality becomes not a flaw but the very essence of the chivalric system. Consider the oath that Ramon Lull prescribes in his Book of the Order of Chivalry, written around 1275 and studied by generations of Seps knights. The knight must defend the church, protect widows and orphans, uphold justice, show mercy to defeated enemies, speak truth always, display courtesy to all, especially women, demonstrate largesse to those beneath him, and maintain his honor above life itself. These are impossible standards designed to fail, creating a perpetual tension between aspiration and achievement. This impossible standard serves crucial social functions. It justifies the knight's privileged position by suggesting he bears special moral burdens. It channels violent impulses into socially acceptable outlets. It creates a shared identity across linguistic and political boundaries. A French knight and an English knight understand each other as gentlemen, even while trying to kill each other. The code makes warfare itself a kind of elaborate game with rules both sides recognize, even if those rules are honored more in breach than observance. The treatment of ransoms illustrates chivalry's practical operation. A captured knight is not killed but held for ransom, treated as a guest rather than prisoner. He gives his parole, his word as a gentleman, and might be released to gather his ransom personally. Breaking such parole means social death, exclusion from the entire chivalric community. This system makes warfare profitable rather than merely destructive, creates incentive for mercy, establishes trust between enemies. Yet chivalry's golden chains bind only those who accept them. The code applies exclusively to those of noble blood. A knight who would never harm a noble lady thinks nothing of raping peasant women. The same warrior who shows elaborate courtesy to a captured prince orders the massacre of common soldiers without hesitation. Chivalry creates a two-tier moral system where those inside the charmed circle deserve consideration, while those outside remain effectively subhuman. The rise of professional soldiers and mercenary companies through the 14th century reveals chivalry's limitations. These fighters, often of common birth, follow no code save profit. They take no ransoms, show no mercy, recognize no rules. The chivalric knight finds himself at disadvantage against enemies who refuse to play by his elaborate rules. The very courtesy that marks him as noble becomes a weakness that pragmatic opponents exploit. The Black Death of 1348 accelerates chivalry's crisis. With perhaps a third of Europe's population dead, the old social order collapses. Peasants demand wages, refuse feudal obligations, revolt when denied. The knightly class, decimated by plague and challenged by social upheaval, clings even more tightly to chivalric ideals. The code becomes not guide for behavior, but nostalgic fantasy, a dream of a world that never really existed, but seems preferable to the chaos of the present. The last charge. Sir Jean de Vienne grips his lance with hands that have held swords for 40 years. But this morning outside the walls of Nicopolis in 1396, something feels different. The Hungarian plain stretches before him, and across it waits the Ottoman army with its strange new weapons. Hollow bronze tubes that belch fire and stone. The age of gunpowder has arrived, though Jean does not yet understand he is charging toward the funeral of his entire way of life. The French and Burgundian knights, flower of Western chivalry, have come to stop the Ottoman advance into Europe. They are confident. These iron men who have never met an enemy, their charge could not break. Jean rides in the front rank, his armour heavier than his father's, designed to turn the crossbow bolts that murdered so many at Crécy. But armour designed for arrows is not tested against lead balls propelled by exploding powder. The charge begins beautifully. 2,000 knights in perfect formation, lances levelled, horses stretching into full gallop. The thunder of their approach shakes the very earth. Turkish light cavalry melts away before them as expected, drawing them forward, deeper into the Ottoman lines. This is how it has always worked. The charge breaks the enemy centre, lesser troops flee, victory follows. Then the cannons speak. The sound is like God tearing the sky in half. Jean sees the knight beside him, young Henri de Bar, simply disappear. One moment a man in full armour, the next a red mist and scattered metal. No time to process this impossibility. The charge must continue. Knights, do not retreat. More cannons, fire, iron balls the size of a man's head, punch through armour as if it were parchment. Horses collapse, their legs sheared off. Knights tumble into the path of their comrades, creating a tangle of flesh and steel. Still the charge continues, those behind pushing forward, unable to see the slaughter ahead, unwilling to believe that their moment has passed. Jean never reaches the Ottoman lines. A lead ball strikes his horse, and he crashes to the ground. His heavy armour, the mark of his status and protection for so many years, now pins him helplessly in the mud. He watches Ottoman infantry approach with their strange, curved swords, sees the pity in their eyes as they look at this old man trapped in his metal shell. The stroke that kills him is almost merciful. Twilight of the Sword, the workshop of Master Hans Scharf in Augsburg, rings with the sound of hammers on steel. But the rhythm is different now. The year is 1453, and news has just arrived that Constantinople has fallen to Ottoman cannons. The great walls that stood for 1,000 years, impregnable to every army that tested them, crumbled in weeks before the patient thunder of gunpowder. Master Hans sets down his work on an elaborate suit of Gothic plate armour and stares at the letter from his cousin, a merchant who witnessed the siege. The world is changing faster than an old armourer can comprehend. This suit he crafts represents the pinnacle of armour-making art. Every plate is shaped to deflect blows, channeling impact away from vital areas. The joints articulate with clockwork precision, allowing almost full range of motion despite complete coverage. The steel itself is heat-treated differentially, harder at the surfaces to resist penetration, softer beneath to absorb impact without shattering. It is a masterpiece that would have made its wearer invincible on the battlefields of Agincourt or even Crécy, but against gunpowder, it is an elaborate coffin. The arquebus, that simple tube of iron with a wooden stock, can punch through the finest plate at 50 yards. It requires no lifetime of training to use, no noble birth to afford. A peasant with 2 weeks' instruction can kill a knight whose ancestors have studied war for 20 generations. The mathematics are inexorable. As guns improve, armour thickens, becoming so heavy that horses can barely carry their riders, that knights must be winched into their saddles. Yet still the bullets penetrate. The social implications run deeper than military revolution. Knighthood has always been justified by its military necessity. Lords deserve their privileges because they provide protection. But what happens when a merchant's hired gunners provide better protection than noble cavalry? What justification remains for the vast estates, the legal privileges, the social hierarchy that places a knight above common humanity? The gun democratizes violence, and in doing so, undermines the entire feudal order. Yet the nobility adapts with surprising creativity. Unable to justify their position through military dominance, they shift to cultural supremacy. The late 15th century sees an explosion of chivalric pageantry. As if by performing knighthood elaborately enough, they can preserve its relevance. Tournaments become more elaborate, even as they become less martial. Armour grows more decorative, even as it becomes less practical. The orders of the Garter, the Golden Fleece, the Star proliferate, each with elaborate rituals and magnificent regalia, creating exclusive clubs where nobles can pretend the world hasn't changed. Consider the heraldic tradition that flowers in this twilight period. Coats of arms become increasingly complex, quartered and counter-quartered, to display every drop of noble blood, every ancestral connection to greatness. Books of heraldry are compiled with the dedication of biblical scholars, tracing lineages back to Charlemagne, to Arthur, sometimes to Troy itself. If knights can no longer dominate the battlefield, they will dominate the imagination, creating genealogical fantasies that justify their continued prominence. The transformation is psychological as much as technological. The knight who wants to find himself through combat must find new sources of identity. Some become courtiers, masters of elaborate etiquette and political intrigue. Others become patrons of art and learning, their castles transformed from fortresses to galleries. Still others cling to military relevance by adapting, becoming officers who command gunpowder armies, translating their hereditary understanding of war into new contexts. Autumn mist over Agincourt. The morning of October 25th, 1415, St. Crispin's Day, dawns wet and cold over the fields between the woods of Agincourt and Tramcourt. Mist rises from the freshly ploughed earth, transformed by overnight rain into a sucking morass that will soon be churned red with blood. The French knights, having learned nothing from Crécy or Poitiers, prepare for another magnificent charge into the teeth of English arrows. They adjust their armour one final time, heavier now than their grandfathers wore, some weighing nearly 60 pounds. The steel gleams dully through the mist, like the scales of sleeping dragons. Listen to the sounds of preparation. 10,000 French knights and men-at-arms crowd into a field barely 700 yards wide, compressed between two forests. Their horses stamp and whinny, sensing the tension. Armour clinks against armour as men struggle for position, each wanting to be in the glorious first rank. They have spent the night in the saddle, afraid to dismount in the rain, afraid to miss the moment when honour will be won. Now they are tired, their horses exhausted, but excitement overcomes fatigue. Across the field, Henry V of England arrays his mere 6,000 men, of whom 5,000 are archers. They have marched for 2 weeks, many suffering from dysentery, all hungry, all desperate to reach Calais in safety. But Henry has chosen his ground well. The narrow field negates the French numerical advantage. The mud will slow their charge, the forests prevent flanking manoeuvres. And those 5,000 archers, each with 70 arrows, represent 350,000 potential deaths. The French nobility cannot conceive of losing to this ragged band. They spend the morning arguing over who deserves the honour of leading the charge, who will capture King Henry, who will win eternal glory. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, tries to impose order, to create a battle plan, but the great lords will not listen to strategy. They are knights. They charge. That is what they have always done. The mist begins to lift as the French advance. They have learned one lesson from previous disasters. They dismount, planning to march on foot to negate the advantage of English arrows against horses. But the mud that would have slowed horses defeats men in heavy armour entirely. Each step requires enormous effort. The field, already soft, becomes a quagmire as thousands of steel-shod feet churn it to paste. Knights sink to their knees, struggle upright, sink again. The neat lines dissolve into a stumbling mob. When the arrows begin to fall, the compressed French formation becomes a death trap. Knights cannot dodge, cannot raise shields without hitting their neighbours, cannot even fall without dragging others down. The English archers, seeing their advantage, fire as fast as they can draw, pouring arrows into the immobilized mass. Knights who have trained their entire lives for combat die without striking a blow, drowned in mud, suffocated by the press of bodies, trampled by their own comrades struggling forward. The condottiere's bargain. Giovanni delle Bande Nere sits in his tent outside Pavia in 1521, studying a contract that would have horrified his knightly ancestors. He commands 3,000 professional soldiers, men who fight not for God or glory or feudal obligation, but for gold. The document before him specifies payment schedules, bonuses for captured artillery, penalties for unauthorized looting. War has become a business, and Giovanni is its most successful entrepreneur. Born Giovanni de' Medici, he could have claimed noble privilege, could have played at being a traditional knight. Instead, he recognized that warfare's future belonged not to hereditary warriors, but to professionals who studied the art of war with scientific precision. His men are not bound by chivalric codes or feudal oaths. They are employees, specialists, technicians of violence who serve whoever pays best. Watch how this new model of warfare operates. Giovanni's company includes German Landsknechts with their 18-foot pikes, Spanish sword and buckler men who fight in ways that would appall traditional knights, Italian crossbowmen who care nothing for honor, only for accuracy. They march in disciplined formations, responding to drum signals, maneuvering with mechanical precision. Individual heroics are discouraged. Victory comes through coordination, timing, superior logistics. The transformation from knight to condottiere represents more than military evolution. It acknowledges that war is too important to leave to amateurs, even noble amateurs. Giovanni studies mathematics to calculate artillery trajectories, reads ancient texts on siege warfare, corresponds with engineers about fortress design. He approaches battle not as a test of courage, but as a problem to be solved efficiently, with minimum loss to his valuable professional soldiers. His employers, the various Italian city-states, who bid for his services, appreciate this pragmatism. They need military force but cannot afford standing armies. The condottieri provide violence on demand, controlled, limited, professional. When the contract ends, the soldiers leave. No messy feudal obligations, no hereditary claims, no noble privileges to respect. It is cleaner, more modern, though perhaps something precious is lost in the transaction. Giovanni dies young, shot by a falconet while besieging a fortress, but his legacy outlives any knight's. The age of professional armies has begun. Soon every European power will maintain permanent forces of paid soldiers, trained continuously, equipped uniformly, commanded by officers who study war as a science. The knight's personal valor becomes irrelevant in an age of artillery barrages and coordinated pike squares. War becomes the province of states, not individuals, and the warrior aristocracy must find new ways to justify its existence. In the Armour Museum, you stand in the medieval galleries of the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the year 2024. The hall stretches before you, populated by hollow knights frozen in eternal readiness. Their empty helms stare at nothing. Their gauntleted hands grip swords they will never swing. The temperature-controlled air carries no scent of horse or leather or blood, only the faint antiseptic smell of climate control and careful preservation. You approach a suit of German Gothic armour, circa 1470. The placard tells you it weighs 58 pounds, belonged to Count Friedrich of Tyrol, cost the equivalent of 40 years' wages for a skilled craftsman. But these facts feel abstract, distant, until you lean close enough to see the actual hammer marks where some long-dead armourer shaped the steel. Each dent represents a blow struck 5.5 centuries ago by a man whose name is lost, but whose skill remains visible in every carefully articulated joint. Reach out, though the museum guards would stop you, and imagine touching the breastplate. The metal would be cool, smoother than you expect, with a subtle texture like expensive fabric. This is spring steel, flexible enough to absorb impact without shattering, hard enough to turn a blade. The overlapping plates at the joints, called lames, slide over each other with mechanical precision. You could, theoretically, perform cartwheels in this armour, though the weight would exhaust you within minutes. Notice the details that speak to humanity within the steel. The right gauntlet shows more wear than the left, polished smooth where a sword grip rubbed for countless hours. Inside the helm, barely visible, are scratch marks where padding was adjusted and readjusted for comfort. A small dent in the left shoulder suggests a blow taken and survived. These are not pristine museum pieces, but working tools that protected living flesh, that moved through real battles, that bear the invisible weight of fears and hopes and desperate prayers. You move to an earlier piece, a male hauberk from the 12th century. The information card notes it contains approximately 30,000 hand-forged rings. Think about that number. If a skilled smith could make and attach one ring every 3 minutes, this single garment represents 1,500 hours of labour, nearly a year of work. Each ring passed through human hands, was heated, shaped, riveted, closed. The patience required seems almost incomprehensible in our age of mass production. A child on a school trip presses their nose against the glass case containing a knight's sword. Their teacher explains it weighs only 3 pounds, surprising everyone who expected these weapons to be heavier. But lift 3 pounds and hold it at arm's length. Count the seconds before your arm begins to shake. Now imagine maintaining that weight through an hour of combat, when every muscle screams for rest, when sweat blinds you, when one moment of weakness means death. The museum's lighting creates shadows that bring the empty armor to life. From certain angles, you can almost see movement, as if knights merely paused mid-gesture and might resume at any moment. This is the paradox of armor. Created to preserve life, it outlasts the life it protected. The flesh is gone, returned to earth centuries ago, but the shell remains, a hollow monument to mortality defied and ultimately accepted. The dream that would not die. In 1839, the young Earl of Eglinton announces he will hold a tournament at his Scottish estate, complete with authentic medieval pageantry. Victorian society, deep in its romantic obsession with the Middle Ages, responds with hysteria. 13,000 spectators arrive to watch 19 knights compete in armour, made by theatrical costumers. It rains torrentially. The tournament ground becomes a swamp. Ladies in medieval costume, made from modern fabrics, huddle under umbrellas that won't be invented for another 4 centuries after the period they're attempting to recreate. The Eglinton tournament should have been ridiculous, the last gasp of an irrelevant tradition. Instead, it catalyses something unexpected. The Victorian era embraces medieval revival with passionate intensity. Gothic architecture returns. Tennyson writes, "Idyls of the King, reimagining Arthur for industrial Britain. The pre-Raphaelites paint knights and ladies with dreamy, idealized faces." Even Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, appears at costume balls in suits of armour specially made for the occasions. This isn't simple nostalgia, but something deeper. As industrialization transforms society at frightening speed, as traditional hierarchies collapse, as science challenges faith, the medieval knight becomes a symbol of imagined stability. He represents a time when social roles were fixed, when honour mattered more than profit, when individual courage could change the world. That this vision is largely fantasy matters less than the psychological need it fulfills. The revival spreads across Europe and into America. Mark Twain will savage it in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, but even his satire acknowledges the power of the dream. Universities adopt Gothic architecture to suggest ancient wisdom. Boys' schools teach muscular Christianity that blends Victorian morality with chivalric ideals. The Boy Scouts, founded in 1907, explicitly model themselves on medieval knighthood, complete with oaths, quests, and codes of honour. Germany's revival takes darker turns. Wagner's operas transform medieval legends into nationalistic mythology. The Teutonic Knights become symbols of German expansion eastward. The SS will eventually adopt medieval imagery, perverting chivalric symbols into instruments of genocide. The dream of knighthood, twisted to serve racial ideology, demonstrates how powerful and dangerous romantic medievalism can become. Yet the dream persists, constantly reinventing itself. Hollywood discovers knights in the 1930s, creating visions of medieval combat that owe more to Victorian imagination than historical reality. Each generation recreates the Middle Ages in its own image. The knights of 1950s films are Cold War warriors defending civilization. The knights of the 1970s are anti-establishment rebels. Modern films present them as complex, flawed humans struggling with PTSD and moral ambiguity. Echoes in modern ceremony. Dawn breaks over Sandhurst Military Academy as officer cadets stand at attention in the morning mist. They wear modern uniforms, train with assault rifles, study satellite reconnaissance. Yet the ceremony about to unfold could have occurred at any medieval court. The commissioning parade, where cadets become officers, follows rituals that stretch back to the dubbing of knights. The sovereign or their representative will tap each cadet's shoulder with a sword, that ancient gesture of transformation from common person to warrior elite. Listen to the language that surrounds modern military culture. Officers hold commissions, documents that, like medieval charters, grant authority from the sovereign. They swear oaths of loyalty that echo feudal vows. They follow codes of conduct descended directly from chivalric ideals: protection of civilians, honourable treatment of prisoners, loyalty to comrades above self. The weapons have changed, but the warrior ethos remains remarkably constant. The British Order of the Garter, founded in 1348, still meets in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. The knights, now including women, wear velvet robes and plumed hats that would seem absurd anywhere else. Yet prime ministers and princes compete for membership. The ceremony, conducted in archaic language, creates continuity across 7 centuries. When Elizabeth II died, her Garter banner was removed with the same solemnity that would have attended a medieval king's passing. Consider how modern nation-states deploy medieval imagery in moments of crisis. Churchill spoke of their finest hour in explicitly chivalric terms. Resistance movements across occupied Europe adopted names like Knights of the White Eagle or Brotherhood of the Sword. The imagery of the knight-errant fighting against overwhelming odds for justice provides a template for understanding modern conflict in moral rather than political terms. The code that remains. In the quiet spaces between our cynicism, the chivalric ideal still whispers its ancient appeal. We may laugh at the notion of knights and ladies, dismiss courtly love as patriarchal fantasy, recognize the violence underlying the pageantry. Yet something in the code continues to resonate, some aspiration toward nobility that transcends historical context. Watch how the language of chivalry permeates our moral vocabulary. We speak of defending the defenseless, of speaking truth to power, of standing up for what's right, even when it costs us. These are chivalric concepts, filtered through centuries, but retaining their essential structure. The strong have obligations to the weak, honour matters more than advantage. Some causes are worth suffering for. We may not use the word chivalry, may actively reject it, but we unconsciously embrace its core premises. The transformation is subtle but profound. Medieval chivalry was exclusive, limited to those of noble blood. Modern chivalry, if we can call it that, democratizes the ideal. Everyone can choose to act with honor. Everyone can defend the vulnerable. Everyone can place principle above profit. The knight's privilege becomes the citizen's responsibility. The sword becomes the vote, the protest sign, the whistleblower's testimony. Consider how we create modern knights in popular culture. Superheroes are knights with extraordinary powers, bound by codes against killing, dedicated to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Jedi Knights explicitly blend Eastern philosophy with Western chivalric tradition. Even anti-heroes define themselves against chivalric ideals, their rejection of the code making sense only because the code exists as reference point. In courtrooms, we still see echoes of trial by combat. Adversarial justice systems pit champion against champion, each representing their client's cause. Lawyers, like medieval champions, fight with words rather than swords, but the structure remains: ritualized combat to determine truth and justice. The judge, like a medieval lord, interprets the law that exists above personal will. The notion of fairness itself carries chivalric assumptions. A fair fight assumes rough equality between combatants, respect for rules, victory through merit rather than treachery. These ideas would seem bizarre to most of human history, where victory by any means was the only goal, that we consider fairness a virtue, that we handicap ourselves to level playing fields, that we feel shame when we win through unfair advantage. These are chivalric legacies encoded in our moral DNA. Digital knights and virtual quests. The computer screen glows in the darkness of a teenager's bedroom at 2 a.m. She guides her avatar, a paladin in gleaming armor, through a digital landscape that would seem familiar to any medieval storyteller. She seeks the Holy Grail, or its virtual equivalent, battles dragons, rescues villagers, gains experience points that translate to greater power. 40 million people worldwide engage in similar quests, finding in virtual worlds the heroic narratives absent from their daily lives. These games don't just reference medieval imagery, they fulfill the same psychological needs that chivalric romance once served. Players want to be heroes, to face clear moral choices, to progress from weakness to strength through effort and virtue. The knight-errant's journey, from untested youth to legendary hero, provides the template for virtually every role-playing game ever created. Players may wield laser swords or magic staffs, but they're essentially playing at being knights. The massive multiplayer online games create something even more interesting. Voluntary feudalism. Players form guilds, swear loyalty to leaders, participate in raids that require coordination and trust. They develop codes of conduct, rules of engagement, systems for distributing loot that mirror medieval concepts of fairness and hierarchy. They recreate, in digital space, the social structures that took centuries to develop in medieval Europe. Consider what this means. Given freedom to create any social structure, millions choose variations of medieval feudalism. They want lords and vassals, quests and honor, brotherhood and belonging. The guild becomes the war band, the raid leader becomes the lord, the epic loot becomes the granted fief. Even the language echoes medieval terminology. Campaigns, quests, honor points, loyalty rewards. The Last Watch. Night falls gently over the ruins of Tintagel Castle in Cornwall, where legend claims Arthur was conceived. The stones, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, glow faintly in the moonlight. Tourists have long departed. Only the sound of waves against cliffs breaks the silence. Here, where history and myth intertwine so completely that no one can separate them, the story of knights finds its perfect resting place. The castle itself is more dream than reality. The ruins visible today date from the 13th century, long after any historical Arthur would have lived. Medieval nobles built here precisely because of the Arthurian association, creating physical reality from literary fiction. They wanted to touch the legend, to make themselves part of the story, to transform stone and mortar into mythology. In this, they succeeded beyond imagination. Stand on these cliffs and consider what the medieval knight truly represents. Not just a warrior, though warfare defined him. Not just an aristocrat, though noble birth enabled him. The knight is humanity's attempt to chain violence with virtue, to make warfare serve civilization rather than destroy it. The attempt failed as often as it succeeded. For every Roland dying heroically at Roncesvalles, there was a crusader wading through blood in Jerusalem. For every Galahad achieving the Grail, there was a robber baron terrorizing peasants from his castle walls. Yet the attempt itself matters more than its failures. The idea that warriors should protect the weak, that strength comes with obligation, that honor matters more than victory, These concepts revolutionized Western civilization. They created a tension between power and responsibility that still shapes our political discourse. Every time we demand that the powerful protect the vulnerable, every time we insist that might doesn't make right, we echo ideals first articulated in chivalric romance. The knight's transformation from historical figure to mythological archetype happened almost immediately. Even as real knights still rode to war, poets and storytellers were already transforming them into something larger than life. Geoffrey of Monmouth invented Arthur, while actual knights still fought in actual battles. The Song of Roland transformed a minor military defeat into epic tragedy, while Charlemagne's empire still existed. The myth and reality evolved together, each shaping the other in an endless dance. This mythologization wasn't accident but necessity. Societies need heroes who embody their highest values, even if those heroes never existed, especially if they never existed. The perfect knight of romance could inspire in ways that flawed historical figures never could. Young men could aspire to Lancelot's prowess while acknowledging their own limitations. The Round Table could represent ideal brotherhood, while actual knights feuded and schemed. The Industrial Age should have ended our fascination with medieval knights. What relevance could mounted warriors have in an era of machine guns and atomic bombs? Yet each technological advance seems to intensify rather than diminish our need for the knightly ideal. The more complex our world becomes, the more we long for the moral clarity of the quest narrative. The more interconnected our societies, the more we crave the intimate bonds of the warband. The more powerful our weapons, the more we need codes that constrain their use. Modern militaries explicitly invoke knightly traditions. Fighter pilots paint personal devices on their aircraft, like heraldic symbols. Special forces units adopt mottos in Latin, the language of medieval learning. Military academies teach honor codes that wouldn't seem foreign to the Knights Templar. Even the technology changes carry medieval echoes. Tanks are armored cavalry, helicopters are air cavalry, and pilots are knights of the air. But perhaps the knight's greatest legacy lies not in military tradition, but in the idea that individuals can make moral stands that matter. The knight-errant, alone on his quest, responsible only to his own conscience and code, provides a template for individual agency in mass society. When someone becomes a whistleblower, risking everything to expose wrongdoing, they follow the knight-errant's path. When someone intervenes to stop violence, accepting personal risk for strangers' sake, they embody chivalric ideals. The knight also gave us the notion of the worthy adversary, the enemy who deserves respect. Medieval romance is full of knights who become friends after fighting, who recognize nobility in their opponents, who mourn enemies they were forced to kill. This idea that shared values can transcend conflict, that today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally, remains crucial for civilization's survival. Without it, every conflict becomes total war, every enemy becomes subhuman, every victory requires annihilation. As you drift towards sleep, let the image of the knight fade gradually, like armor slowly tarnishing in a forgotten castle vault. The historical knight is long dead, his castle's ruins, but his codes never obsolete. The dream of the knight remains vivid, constantly reborn in new forms. Every generation discovers its own Camelot, finds its own grails to seek, identifies its own dragons to slay, but these ideas are pointless, if not rooted in eternal truth. The medieval knight began as a warrior, adapted to specific technological and social conditions. He evolved into a cultural ideal that transcended those conditions. He transformed finally into an archetype that speaks to permanent human needs. The need for heroes, for honor, for causes worth serving. The armor rusts, the castles crumble, the bloodlines fade, but the dream endures. In the end, perhaps that's what the medieval knight truly was. Not a historical figure, but a collective dream of what warriors could be if they served something greater than themselves. That dream proved more durable than stone, more powerful than gunpowder, more enduring than the aristocracies that created it. It rides still through our imaginations, forever charging toward an ideal that remains forever just beyond the reach of our extended lance. Thank you for exploring these quiet pathways of the past with me. I wish you a calm and peaceful night, filled with dreams of castles in the morning mist, of banners rippling in ancient winds, of knights who rode through history into legend, and from legend into the permanent architecture of human hope. May ancient peace settle over you like a gentle blanket.